Welcome to the PetroPapers podcast. Say that 10 times fast. This is where you get your oil and gas intellectual stimulation by asking the technical questions. I'm Yogashri Pradhan, and with me here today, I have Dr. Matthew Balhoff, who is the department chair at the Hildebrand Petroleum and Geosystems Engineering Department at the University of Texas. Hook 'em. Now, this season is a little bit different in that instead of talking about papers, we're going to talk about people, explore their career trajectories, and learn about what advice they're going to give us in terms of how to give technical contributions to the industry. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Balhoff.
Thank you. And thank you for having me, Yoshi. This is truly an honor.
Well, Dr. Balhoff, let's get right into it. It's kind of funny because when I was talking to Dr. Pradanovich in doing the podcast recording, I realized that when you have someone as a professor, you can't call them by their first name. You can just never call them by their first name ever again. I'm always going to call you Dr. Balhoff. So I just thought I would I'd just share that with you. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, how did you get here? Like, what is your career path? And I'd like to know about that.
Yeah, so it's a long journey. I'll try to make it as brief as possible, but I'm a chemical engineer by training. So I got my bachelor's degree at LSU and eventually my PhD at LSU, all in chemical engineering. I was a little unique as an undergraduate in that I always had considered a graduate degree or even a PhD when I was an undergrad. And that was largely because my dad has a PhD in chemical engineering. So it was something I grew up with and something I always thought about. I wasn't truly sure about it until I had done some work for a research and development company, and I was working with PhDs. And I'll never forget, I was working on a project and they were trying to figure something out. I was working in the lab and I had this big breakthrough and it was so exciting. I had managers leaning over my shoulder trying to understand what I did. And it was in that moment that I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to work on research problems. I want to work on problems that have that are high risk but high reward and can really make a difference and to do fundamental research that can have a big impact. And so I think it was in that moment that I decided for sure I wanted to go to graduate school, and I did do my PhD in chemical engineering, but it was on flow through porous media and hydraulic fractures. And so it was starting to lean more into the petroleum engineering realm, but I was still a chemical engineer. In fact, I like to tell people I'm a chemical engineer if the price of oil is below $80 a barrel, and a petroleum engineer if it's above. I change that joke depending on what the price of oil is from time to time, but I got to shift that number there. But I did get my PhD in chemical engineering, but like I say, started going to SBE conferences and writing in SBE papers, those kinds of things. And a big turning point in my life and was I went to a conference in Oxford, England, and at that conference, it was pointed out to me that Mary Wheeler was there, and she's of course a professor here at UT Austin, and it was pointed out to me that she was one of a world-renowned finite element person. If I had an opportunity to meet her, I should. And it was less than 2 hours later that she walked by me during our poster session and was excited about my work. And I mean, I just remember feeling giddy that this person that was pointed out to me as a world-renowned person was excited in my work. And that ended up leading to doing a postdoc here at UT Austin with Mary. That's what brought me here, and eventually ended up into the petroleum engineering department as a professor, where I've been for 16 years, and I absolutely love it.
Awesome. That's a very interesting story. I didn't realize that at all. I remembered sitting in your class that when you used to give us the introduction, you gave us a short version of it where you got your PhD in chemical engineering.
Yeah.
I wanted to unpack a couple of things that you talked about in terms of inflection points. So what have been some key inflection points for you when pursuing technical growth?
So certainly some of the things I mentioned, right? So getting my PhD in chemical engineering, but something related to oil and gas. And that was sort of by chance because I chose my project because I liked the advisor and I liked that it was mathematical, numerical in nature, but it was kind of by chance. It was starting to be in the petroleum, oil, and gas realm, flow through porous media. Certainly another inflection point by chance was meeting Mary at that conference. So who knows where I would be today if it weren't for that. Certainly could be working in industry or completely different university, but that was a big inflection point for me. But I would say that there's also been several here at UT. So I was a numerical method sort of modeling kind of person for really all my PhD in my first several years here. But working with different faculty and collaborating with them really changed the kind of work I do. So I went from being almost 100% computational numerical person to being probably 75% experimental. And we're just working on different problems. And I mean, I'd say lots of little inflection points here in my 16 years at UT, just collaborating with wonderful faculty and learning about new topics and new problems that I probably wouldn't have explored on my own.
Awesome. Now that's always inspirational whenever you're in a community that there's always that inflection point. There's
Yeah.
there's always that area of growth.
Yeah, and you know, when you ask those questions, it just makes me think of back is that the all the little things that pointed to me to where I am today, and I could be somewhere completely different, you know, not working in oil and gas at all, or not being in academia at all, or if I was in a different university, a different city, but it's just those little things that seem to send us on our paths.
Exactly. You wonder like you wonder what would have happened if there was a different inflection point. So there was something that I wanted to ask you regarding your vision as chair. So what is your vision for the Hildebrand Petroleum and Geosystems Engineering Department?
So I have an official vision, and I will read it, but maybe I'll expand on that after that. So my vision is to be the preeminent academic department in the world for education, innovative research, and advocacy of subsurface energy production, but also storage for the betterment of society. So that's my vision, but I to achieve that mission, there's several things I'd really would like to focus on. Some of those are recruiting faculty, graduate students, undergraduate students. I think that in our where we're at right now, those are going to be more challenging. 10 years ago, maybe we just recruited ourselves, but we got to be more active and find the best people and convince them as to why they want to be in petroleum and geosystems, or specifically here at UT Austin. Another priority is to expand our research funding and the types of research funding that we get. But another big one for me is what I would call adapting our educational policies to a changing world. And we've always got to be wary of that in education is that as the world changes, we need to make sure that we're changing our classes and how we teach in that. And so a few examples of that are making sure that we're focusing more on unconventional and shale reservoirs, because we know that especially our undergraduates, that a large percentage of them, maybe most of them, are going and working in that area. And so that was something that 20 years ago we weren't talking a lot about, but is obviously a priority now. And not just electives, but maybe our required classes too. Another thing is the digital transformation. So when I first got to UT, I remember teaching programming, and all my students told me is like, why do we have to learn this? I just need to know how to use Excel. I have family and friends in the industry, and they don't do any of this programming stuff. But now you hear the reverse, is that if you don't know how to do those things, then you are at a severe disadvantage. And so Python programming, computer skills, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, those are things that I want to make sure that we focus on in our curriculum and our students are very well prepared for. Another one is the energy transition. and making sure, or what I like to call it, and some of my colleagues, like Hillary Olson, like to call it, is the energy expansion, because I do think that oil and gas is going to be here, but energy demand is going to increase. And so something needs to fill that gap at a minimum. And so we're working on geothermal energy and lithium production and hydrogen storage and so many other things. And so we want to make sure that our students are equipped to work in those areas as well, because I do think that that will be a growing market. I do think that oral and written communication, soft skills are very important. And of course, I'm being interviewed by the expert here who won the SBE International Student Paper Contest, and so those are the kinds of things that I want all of our students to be exposed to. And you know that the paper contest has always been close to my heart, and I want more students to be exposed to that or exposed to similar things, because when it comes to presentation skills, for example, those are skills that once you learn it once, you take that with you for the rest of your life. Like you don't forget that. If you never learn it, you'll never know it. But once you learn it once, I think that those are the kinds of things that you bring with you. And then one last thing that I'm very passionate about is creating curricula that are more synergistic and holistic. And by that, I mean is making sure that our classes are well connected and students can kind of see how different classes feed into each other. How does petrophysics lead into reservoir engineering, and where are the similarities? And I've got a few different ideas on that and all of these things, but it's going to be working with our faculty and staff together, and we're going to come up with ideas on hopefully how to, well, we're first going to tweak that vision that I talked about, but then work together to implement the vision.
Well, that's amazing, because I think if we do have listeners who are alumni as well. So if those who are the alumni and are part of UT Network, if you hear Dr. Balhoff's vision through this podcast, I mean, feel free to chip in and help out. And I'm definitely going to be the one to help out as
Yeah.
well to
And I'm glad you said that, because I keep on saying that it's not my vision, it's our vision. And by our vision, I mean all of our faculty, all of our staff, all of our students, but also all of our alumni. And if there are ideas, if there are things that we should be focusing on as a department, let me know. And we'll try to incorporate that as part of our vision, and come up with ideas to implement that.
Absolutely. I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about, from your experience, and I know from my experience as well, what kind of advice would you give to our listeners on making technical contributions to the industry?
Yeah. So the most important thing to make technical contributions is to understand what the technical problems are. So you can't make a contribution if you don't know what to make it towards. So reading the literature, right? Reading the SBE literature, and of course you've got your podcast specifically on PetroPapers, going to conferences, SBE and other conferences, and talking to people in industry, at those conferences or elsewhere, and finding out what the technical problems are so that you can address them, right? Because it doesn't matter if you have got the biggest hammer in the world. If you don't have the nail, if you don't know where the nail is that it doesn't matter. And so understanding those problems, and then I would say try to be creative, and don't automatically assume that somebody has already thought of your idea, right? So that's how problems are solved, is somebody new coming along and thinking about a problem differently and approaching that and coming up with a solution. So those would be my two things, is to say, know what the problem is, but then also try to come at that problem a little bit different way, and to be creative, and then apply your tools and expertise to solve it.
Absolutely. No, I love the fact that you made the point of, we need to know what the problem is before we can make that contribution. Because I realize that people want to immediately go to the solution, but sometimes the problem hasn't been formulated or hasn't been really clarified. So that's great to have that goal. There's one more question I wanted to ask you
Okay.
before I let you go. And I know you touched upon this a little bit, but what motivates you to solve problems in oil and gas?
Oh, lots of things. I mean, I would say that the biggest is it's such an important part of our daily lives and for the planet. And energy is so important. It An abundance of energy that's affordable and that's safe brings people out of poverty. And to know that that's so important to billions of people across the world and working to do that. Is important and that's exciting. But also it's I think it's just a fun industry and to think that we're trying to extract oil and gas that's maybe a couple miles below the Earth's surface, and we're trying to make predictions decades into the future is really cool, and it's really challenging, and I find that a lot of fun, and especially as a reservoir engineer, there's so much opportunity to succeed, right? Because even on a typical water flood, after decades of production, we might leave 2/3 of the oil behind, right? And so if I can just do a little bit, then I can be a big hero, right? Because there's so much opportunity. 2/3 of a giant reservoir is a lot of oil, and I do a lot of stuff, as you know, in enhanced oil recovery and other things, and just getting an extra 5% makes just a tremendous difference. So it's an important industry, and I think it's a fun industry, and there's a lot of opportunities.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for your time on this podcast, Dr. Balhoff.
Yeah, well, thank you, Yoshi, and thank you for being such a supportive alum, and really just being an advocate for our industry and what it is we do.
Absolutely. Well, folks, that's everything that we wanted to show for PetroPapers on this episode. Feel free to contact Dr. Balhoff and reach out to his website and reach out to all of the research that he's been a part of, as well as our vision of the Department of the Hildebrand Petroleum and Geosystems Department at the University of Texas. This is Yoga Pradhan and signing out.